I think I'll stand. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So, hopefully this only takes about 15 minutes. I'll go through it pretty quick. I'm going to stick to my script because if I go off script, it'll take 30 or 40 minutes. So, don't let me do that too much. So we can go to page 2. So my name is Whiting Russell Willauer Jr. I'm the grandson of Whiting Willauer, the son of Whiting Russell Willauer. The Russell was picked up by my grandmother, who was a Russell on Nantucket. So this is a man that I never knew. He died 3 weeks after I was born. And so when I was asked to do this presentation, I realized I would need to do some research. I knew very little about my grandfather or that period in American history. So I did a little research. We can go on to the next page. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to focus on the actual words spoken by my grandfather via some Senate testimony he did in 1961, an oral history that he did in 1960, various top secret documents. I also consulted a couple of books like Perilous Missions. There was a book about his uncle, Kenneth Whiting. I also interviewed my Aunt Sally Willauer Nash, his daughter, who's 90 years old, on Nantucket this summer. And she gave very valuable insight. And I took a little bit of look at the family tree. I mean, who are these Willauers? Who are these Whitings? So we can go on to the next page. All right, so the Willauers came to America in 1727, led by Christian Willauer. We're basically Pennsylvania Dutch, or Deutsche for German. We came from a place called Willau in the Rhineland version of what is now Germany. My grandfather's grandfather was Major Seneca Willauer, who fought in the Civil War for the Union Army and played a key role in the capture of John Wilkes Booth, who was obviously the assassin of President Lincoln. The Willauers arrived a lot earlier. I mean, not the Willauers. The Whitings arrived in 1630, led by William Whiting, who founded and became the first treasurer of the Connecticut colony in Hartford, Connecticut. So we can turn to the next page. So, Whiting Willauer was the first of 4 kids born on November 30th, 1906 in New York City. His parents were Arthur Ebbs Willauer and Catherine Whiting. That's a picture of his grandmother. His father died of appendicitis when he was 6. His mother remarried a year later but died of the Spanish flu when Whiting was only 12. Stepfather refused to care for the kids, which was totally fine because he wasn't very nice to them. So they got sent to their grandmother, Daisy, right there. So we can turn the page. I'll turn my page. So we're skipping ahead here. So anyway, Daisy Day and her son, Uncle Kenneth, were very influential in my grandfather's upbringing. Willauer spoke very fondly with a lot of admiration, love, and respect for his grandmother, Daisy, crediting her with teaching him about hard work and money and for guiding his education from prep school to Princeton and Harvard Law. Daisy's husband, Elliot Whiting, while very charming, lacked motivation. The family business and wealth that he inherited collapsed, and he was unable to support the family. Daisy, who was very strong-willed, fiercely independent, and hardworking, supported the family on her own by developing a successful interior decorating business in Larchmont, New York. So this is Kenneth Whiting and my grandfather, and a little bit about him. He was a terrible, terrible student. His mother got him into the Naval Academy. He wanted to be an artist in France. She said, no way. Got him into the Naval Academy, where he promptly flunked out his first year. She managed to get him back in, and he graduated near the bottom of his class. Do you know what you call somebody who graduates from the bottom of their class from the Naval Academy?
Anchorman.
Admiral. Oh. They're the best people because they know people. They don't waste their time studying, right? So he did very well thereafter. After he did get court-martialed a year out, he and a buddy got a little overserved and broke onto a naval vessel and managed to get into the pilot house and throw up all over the charts. So that's all in the book about him. You can read it, it's apparently true, I don't know. So he became a submarine commander. He had this great idea that you could escape out the torpedo tube. He was a very good swimmer. He was put in the torpedo tube and he managed to swim out and swim up to the surface. Don't know how he did it. Then he became a naval aviator. He actually trained with Orville Wright in 1914. There's a picture of him right there. Look what airplanes look like, right? It was crazy. I mean, and it wasn't that much longer after that we were flying, real aircraft. So he led the Navy's first aeronautical detachment in France during World War I. His big contribution was conceiving, developing, and commanding the first aircraft carrier, the USS Langley. Okay, for this, he's known as the father of the aircraft carrier. Whiting Field Naval Air Station in Pensacola, Florida, is named for him. Whiting and his uncle Kenneth shared a love of sailing, flying, leadership, and living on the edge. He was actually a really super sailor. One admiral called him a wizard in a sailboat. Sailing kind of runs in my family. Yes. All right, so we're going to turn the page and go on to the next slide. Okay, so Aunt Jo Willauer owned a house on West Chop on Martha's Vineyard, and she brought the 4 Willauer children there in the summers. And it was during these summers that Whiting cultivated a love of the sea and a spirit of adventure. He worked as a sailing instructor on the waters where his brother Elliot founded the Vineyard Haven Yacht Club, serving as Commodore. In 1929, during a sailing trip from Martha's Vineyard to Nantucket with a friend, my grandfather met my grandmother, Louise Knapp Russell, who's pictured right there. Quite taken by Louise, he asked her father, Ben Russell, if I were to ask you permission to marry your daughter, would you approve? And he said, yes, absolutely. There was just one small problem. She was already engaged. Not sure exactly what happened, but let me see. So actually the story was that when my grandfather left Nantucket, he gave her his phone number and said, if it doesn't work out, give me a call. True story, according to my grandmother. So somehow they were engaged 7 months later, February 28th, 1930, and married on June 21st, 1930. This is right out of their wedding book, so that's the proof right there. Who were the Russells, by the way? Well, the Russells were related to the founders, basically the early English settlers of Nantucket. They arrived in 1659. My great-grandfather's grandfather was Daniel Russell, who was the captain of the famous whaling ship Essex. Essex was the boat that got sunk by the whale in 1820, about the story about which Moby Dick is written. Now, Daniel was not the captain. His first mate, George Pollard, had taken over command of the Essex, and he was the one who got sunk by the whale. And he managed to sink another Nantucket ship after that, and he had to retire. Nobody would let him do any more trips. All right, so I guess we can turn the page. All right, so from the Stone School and Phillips Exeter, Willauer matriculated to Princeton, where he captained both the football and the lacrosse teams. He was All-American lacrosse, graduating cum laude in 1928. Then on to Harvard Law, where he graduated in 31 in the top 10% of his class. Competitive and tough, he suffered multiple injuries, including the dislocation of his right shoulder 26 times. He could not raise his right arm above his shoulders. Newly married with kids, he lived in Dedham, Massachusetts, and practiced admiralty law at Bingham, Dana, and Gould in Boston from 31 to 39. While it was a nice life, he wanted to serve his country, much like his uncle Kenneth Whiting. We can turn to the next slide. Okay, so he got a job in Washington, D.C. with the Civil Aeronautics Board in 1939, where he helped coordinate the establishment of Washington National Airport, which some of us, I think, flew into. He also served in the Department of Justice's Criminal Division, where he investigated judicial corruption and conspiracies involving Nazis and communists. This is a quote from him. It was during this work, Willauer recalled, that my eyes were first really opened to the techniques of international subversion. We got a good introduction to the aims and methods of the communist conspiracy. Willauer also went on to work for the Federal Power Commission and worked on the St. Lawrence Seaway project. Now, turn the page, as the As the war loomed on, Willauer volunteered for active duty. He really wanted to get involved with the war. He was a naval reservist, but anyway, he failed the physical exam. Guess why? Because he had dislocated his shoulder 26 times. So what did he do? He really wanted to be involved. He didn't want to get stuck by a hand of death, so he called his roommate from both Princeton and Harvard. They met him at Exeter, Howard F. Cochran, who put him in touch with his brother, Tommy Cochran, who had become a top advisor to President Franklin D. Roosevelt, who had ordered Tommy to create an organization called China Defense Supplies, CDS. His brother, David Cochran, was hired as president. Willauer was hired as executive secretary. So somebody said that all college is all about connections, right? Anyway, according to Willauer, the primer, we all know this. We saw the video yesterday. I'm going to start skipping ahead because we saw a great movie yesterday. And by the way, my vote is we need to get that movie done and out there, right?
Yes.
Definitely.
Yes.
It was fantastic.
Yeah.
So the function of CDS was to aid in the formation of General Chennault's American volunteer group, known as the Flying Tigers, in support of Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist government against the Japanese and rising communist forces. So in my grandfather's words, he said in his oral history, "I remember in the dark days of Pearl Harbor that the victories of the Flying Tigers were the only bright spots in a series of disasters to U.S. forces." Now, according to Sally, he thrived in chaos and mission-driven environments. So according to Sally, he got to be very good friends with General Chennault. Well, we already all know that, right? So he was, she said of General Chennault, this is my aunt, he was a talented, gutsy, fly-by-the-seat-of-your-pants kind of guy, a very bright perfectionist, much like her dad. So let me see. So the war ends. What are these guys going to do next? Play cards? I don't think so. According to Whitey, he says, "I don't know whether General Chennault or I got the idea first. I think we really got it simultaneously. With all our time working closely together, General Chennault and I became fast friends and fellow workers. After the war, it seemed a natural thing for us, with our mutual love for China, to return to China together to try to help in the reconstruction of that vast country by starting an airline." So the financing was interesting. I'll leave it at that. It was eventually founded in October 25th, 1948, and we know what happened. This is Chennault, my grandmother, and my grandfather, so Louise, and she was a force to be reckoned with. I haven't said much about her, but my goodness gracious, anybody who knew her, and she was really good to her grandchildren. I loved her. She really was my mom and my rock, and just a wonderful lady. That she was really hard on her kids, though. Gosh, it was much better being a grandchild. So anyway, so one of the things I always say about Willauers is when there's a big problem and it seems impossible, when there's a Willauer, there's a way to get it done. So apparently, my grandfather was designated the admiral of the Cat Fleet for his idea, along with some others, in terms of how to transport, basically create a floating airplane hangar. And that was the landing ship tank here that was created. It was, 327 feet. And, that's how they got out of there. So through the experience that he had up to this point in his career, Willauer had bridged private enterprise, humanitarian relief, and covert operations, which really set the stage for the next chapter of his life in Central America. He left CAP, in the early 50s. And let's see, so, go to the next slide. There we go. So with communism spreading to the back door of the United States, President Eisenhower called on several people well-versed in the threat of communism to serve as ambassadors in Latin America, including Whiting Willauer, Honduras in 1954, John Purifoy in Guatemala, and Robert Hill in Costa Rica. According to Willauer, he was instructed to give all possible assistance to the CIA team preparing a rebel force to overthrow the Guatemalan government. Guatemala President Jacobo Arbenz was a growing threat because of his communist policies, which included land reforms that undermined the United Fruit Company. Basically, they were taking the land away from the United Fruit Company. That was their idea. The overthrow was a success, largely due to air cover. It's all about airplanes here. Via a tiny but potent liberation air force that gave the illusion of overwhelming power, shattering morale, and giving the rebels legitimacy. Arbenz' commanders, believing a full U.S. invasion was imminent, refused to fight. This became a model of Cold War success. A communist-aligned government had been toppled without direct U.S. military intervention. So next, Eisenhower appointed Willauer ambassador to Costa Rica, where he continued to keep his eyes on communism. In Cuba, Fidel Castro had overthrown American-friendly Batista in January '59 and was consolidating power. While some U.S. officials initially saw Castro as a nationalist reformer, Willauer and Eisenhower knew better. Let's go to the next slide. So in 1959, the CIA commenced planning to overthrow Castro by training rebel forces in Guatemala and in Florida. On December 10th, 1960, Willauer was hired by Eisenhower to critique this plan. The message was given to him by Secretary of State Christian Herter, who said, "This has been going on since March 17th, 1960, the preparations for an invasion backed by the CIA, but run by Cubans. I want you to be the senior partner alongside Principal Manager of CIA Operations, Officer Tracy Barnes. You are to have access to every piece of information. Get in there and take a good hard look at the plan. Give us your real opinion on it. This is quite a lot of doubt. There's quite a lot of doubt about whether this plan is correct, what the timing should be, various problems about pulling this thing together." Well, you can see the conclusion. He dug in, and January 16th, he pulled the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the CIA, representatives from the Department of State and Defense together into a big meeting. This was, by the way, the first time the military was formally brought into this plan. And the conclusion was the plan was destined to fail. It needed some changes. My grandfather said the operation has practically no chance of success without air cover. The operation should not proceed without a much higher probability of success. His specific recommendations were first and foremost air cover, pre-invasion airstrikes to destroy Castro's small air force of T-33 jets and B-26 bombers, and then ongoing fighter air cover during the landings to protect the Cuban exile invasion force. He also recommended the recognition of a provincial Cuban government in exile to provide political legitimacy and open door for U.S. assistance if needed. We couldn't have this operation fail. And so number 3 was U.S. military forces had to be standing by, ready to assist. And then they needed a larger invasion force. The plan only had 750 people. They went with 1,400, but he was talking more in the order of 10,000 that needed to go in there to get the job done. Okay, so we can go on to the next slide. Just weeks later, unfortunately, President John F. Kennedy inherited the plan. So there was a transition there. On February 8th, '61, after a meeting with new Secretary of State Dean Rusk, Willauer was told rather bluntly by a new advisor to Kennedy, Adolph Burl, "You are not needed." So from then on, he was basically pushed out of the planning. So the invasion launched April 17th, 1961. President Kennedy, worried about plausible deniability and public optics, canceled most of the air cover. Much of it was canceled at the last minute. The invasion force landed with minimal air support. Castro's T-33s had not been destroyed, and they ended up destroying the transport ships and pinning the people on the beaches. Kennedy refused to call on the Navy and the Marines, which were on standby. Rather than finish the job, Kennedy backed off, humiliating himself and the United States. The lack of effective air cover was a primary reason for the invasion's failure. This hit my grandfather pretty hard. He was left bitter, disappointed, and really depressed. My Aunt Sally said this summer the Bay of Pigs really walloped him. While my dad seemed tough, he was actually very sensitive and thin-skinned. He took things personally. He had put his heart and his soul into stopping Castro and the spread of communism. He cared too much. Too much. The experience killed him. On August 6, 1962, Willauer died at the age of 56 of a heart attack on Nantucket. One author hit the nail on the head. Ambassador Whiting Willauer died of a broken heart. I'm going to start crying here. Knowing that had he been kept on the job, 7 million people would have had the chance of liberation from communism. Yep. Though he had been praised as an American hero by senators only the year before, his exclusion from the Cuba planning left him deeply wounded. And so we're going to move from there to a little bit more about the man and his impact on his family and intergenerationally, his dad and to me and to my kids. So I asked my Aunt Sally this summer, I said, what was it like to be his daughter? This is Sally there and my father and of course Whiting. She made clear to me that the Willauer characteristics had definitely been passed down to my father and to me. Of her father, Sally said, work came first before anything. I think that really kind of ran, that was pretty much ran through the Cat family. His priorities in this order were job, accomplishments, social activities, and family. He cared for us, but he did not show it. Your father, she said of my father, was the same way. He cared a lot about you, but you weren't going to see it. It was in your accomplishments more that you could see his approval, which is so true. Sally explained that her father's stoicism stemmed from the childhood trauma of being abandoned twice. This made him emotionally reserved, focused on duty and work. Wow. I mean, the downside to all this was kind of challenging on his own kids, Whiting, Sally, and Tommy. One example that she gave was Canton. The family was evacuated from Shanghai to Canton on November 18th, 1948. She remembered that day, to this day. She was 14 years old. It was traumatic. So suddenly, I was a very crazy situation, grabbing kids and throwing them on planes and then a new place. As an aside, Bill Chen recounted to me that it was in Canton that he and his brother, Bob, and along with Tommy Willauer, age 8, and Sally Willauer, age 14, traveled to a one-room schoolhouse together with Sally, the older one, shepherding the young boys so they wouldn't linger at school and miss the bus back home. So that Christmas, my grandfather announced to Tommy and Sally, my dad was in the United States, there will be no Christmas this year. Imagine telling that to your kids. Great. The parents then abandoned their kids with the employees in Canton to be together in yet-to-fall Shanghai on Christmas, as Whitey had to work and Louise wanted to celebrate her Christmas Eve birthday with her husband. Sally took it upon herself to buy presents and to stuff the stockings to celebrate Christmas with her brother Tommy, who believed in Santa Claus. So life for the Willauer kids involved being taken in by various people, including aunts and uncles, so their parents could focus on fighting communism. So that, the toll of the family, the sacrifice was significant. So we can go on to the next slide. We're going to just go through a few fun stories to round out the character here. So obviously, he learned how to fly, right? And this is a picture of their little airplane in Nantucket. This is actually Tommy right there in the seat, the co-pilot seat. So he learned how to fly, but you did not have all the navigation instruments back then that you have now. So you really had to be looking at airspeed, ground speed, altitude, sight, dead reckoning, that kind of stuff. On a foggy day in Nantucket, when my little brother Tommy and I were to fly with Dad to Cape Cod on this small little airplane, Dad, always willing to help someone in need, offered to give some random, nerdy, nervous guy a ride to the vineyard. This guy just had to get to the vineyard for some reason. We made several unsuccessful attempts to find the fogged-in airport on the vineyard. Tommy threw up, and Dad opened a window to drop the throw-up bag out. The mystery passenger sitting in the co-pilot seat was visibly uncomfortable, quiet and white as a sheet. Dad was forced to give up and fly onto the Cape. We had trouble finding the airport in the fog, but suddenly there it was, so we landed. This is crazy stuff. Yeah. Who does this? crazy cat pilots. A bunch of people came running out yelling emphatically, "You cannot land here. This is Otis Air Force Base." So Dad explained where he was trying to go, and they said, "Look, it's in that direction, and you need to get out of here." Well, the guy that was in the co-pilot seat said, "I'm out of here." They never saw him again. Disappeared into the fog. So they took off and somehow found, they flew at low altitude and found the airports they had landed safely. So anyway. So she said of her dad, he liked to be informal. He liked to wear pilot suits a lot, obviously, because he'd been in a pilot and an airline executive. So they were at a reception in Antigua, Guatemala, where they had a house. A guest had a conversation with a pilot, exclaiming how excited she was to meet the ambassador. Whitey played along, eventually getting a good laugh when he introduced himself to her. She had no idea she was already talking to the ambassador. And then the last story is when they went skiing, she said that Dad wore his Princeton football helmet and shoulder pads under a great big wind jacket with his arm tied to his waist so his shoulder wouldn't go out. So if he fell down, he couldn't even get up. She giggled at him because he looked like a giant bug. He wasn't afraid to look silly when being practical, and she said he was comically practical. So in wrapping up, we can go to the last page. Whiting Willauer was a daring, driven, and deeply sensitive man who lived for great missions, cared too much, and left behind the spirit of a fighter with a human heart. And that's all I have. Thank you, guys.